In the autumn of 1911, the mountains of eastern Appalachia carried cold winds earlier than usual. The people living in the narrow valleys beneath the Black Ridges believed the weather itself was angry. Old women whispered that the crows had begun flying backward over the river, and hunters swore the deer had disappeared deeper into the woods long before the first frost touched the ground. In the isolated settlement of Mercer Hollow, where dirt roads vanished into thick pine forests and every cabin sat miles apart from the next, silence had become heavier than prayer. Most people in Mercer Hollow survived on timber work, trapping, and whatever little corn they could grow on rocky hillsides. The nearest church stood 12 miles away. The nearest lawman was farther still. Families handled their own troubles there. A man's reputation mattered more than law, and fear often traveled faster than truth. At the edge of the hollow stood the Bellamy farm, a crooked patch of land surrounded by dead chestnut trees. The Bellamy family had lived there for almost 30 years. Elias Bellamy, the father, was a broad-shouldered man with silver in his beard and eyes that rarely showed kindness. He had once worked the railroads before settling in the mountains after marrying Ruth Weaver, a quiet woman from Kentucky whose beauty had faded beneath hard winters and grief. The Bellamys had 4 children. Samuel, the oldest, was 26 and carried the same hard expression as his father. Mary Bellamy was 22 and known around the hollow for speaking little and staring too long into the woods. Isaac, 19, limped from an old logging accident and spent most of his time carving strange symbols into scraps of wood. The youngest was 12-year-old Clara Bellamy, a pale child who was rarely seen outside the farm. People in Mercer Hollow avoided the Bellamy place whenever possible. Livestock disappeared near their property. Hunters passing the old trails at night claimed they heard screaming coming from underground. Some said Elias Bellamy buried animals alive during full moons. Others insisted the family practiced old mountain rituals brought down through generations from forgotten corners of Europe. Most dismissed such stories as mountain gossip. Then Deputy Walter Finch arrived in Mercer Hollow. Walter Finch was 34, recently transferred from Knoxville after the death of his wife from tuberculosis. He was not a mountain man. He walked differently, spoke cleaner, and believed every mystery had a reasonable explanation waiting beneath the dirt. The people of Mercer Hollow distrusted him immediately. He rented a room above the general store owned by Edgar Pike and spent his evenings drinking bitter coffee while listening to locals tell stories they half believed themselves. The Bellamys ain't natural, Edgar Pike warned one rainy evening. Walter sat near the stove polishing mud from his boots. Every town says that about somebody. Edgar shook his head slowly. No, I mean it different. Folks disappear around them hills. How many? Edgar hesitated. Enough. Walter smirked faintly. That ain't a number. You'll learn. 3 days later, a young timber worker named Noah Hatcher vanished while traveling through Mercer Hollow after dark. His mule returned without him. The saddlebags were torn open, and dried blood stained the leather. Walter organized a search party the next morning. Men carrying lanterns and rifles spread through the woods while fog drifted low across the hills. Near dusk, they found Noah's body hanging upside down from a tree less than half a mile from the Bellamy property. His throat had been cut. What unsettled the search party most was not the murder itself, but the symbols carved into Noah's chest with surgical precision. Circles, lines, strange markings no one recognized. One of the older men crossed himself. Repeatedly. God protect us, he whispered. Walter knelt beside the body, studying the cuts. This wasn't done by an animal. No, the old man muttered. Done by something worse. Walter questioned nearly every resident in Mercer Hollow during the next week. Most refused to speak openly about the Bellamys. Fear sat inside them like sickness. One woman finally admitted that Clara Bellamy had once appeared outside her cabin after midnight, barefoot in the snow. She asked if I heard the crying under the ground, the woman whispered. Said her mama told her not to answer the voices no matter how loud they got. Walter rode to the Bellamy farm the following morning. The house looked older up close. The wood had blackened with age and rot. Broken animal bones hung from strings beneath the porch roof, clacking softly in the wind. Samuel Bellamy answered the door. His expression never changed. You lost? He asked. I'm Deputy Walter Finch. I know who you are. Walter glanced past him into the dim hallway. Mind if I ask your family a few questions? Samuel stared for several seconds before stepping aside. The inside of the house smelled like wet earth and spoiled meat. Ruth Bellamy sat near the fireplace knitting silently. Isaac carved symbols into a piece of wood with a pocketknife. Clara sat in the corner clutching a rag doll missing one eye. Elias Bellamy emerged from another room carrying a lantern though it was daylight outside. "You're trespassing," he said. Walter kept his voice calm. "I'm investigating Noah Hatcher's murder. We heard. Where were you folks 2 nights ago?" "Home. All of you." "Yes." Walter noticed Mary Bellamy standing near the back doorway. Her eyes looked exhausted, dark circles hanging beneath them. She watched Walter carefully. "Did any of you know Noah Hatcher?" Walter asked. Nobody answered. Then Clara spoke softly. "He shouldn't have crossed the creek after dark." The room became still. Walter turned toward her. "Why's that?" Clara looked down at the doll. "Because the thing in the mine gets hungry at night." Ruth Bellamy snapped her head toward the child. "Enough." Walter narrowed his eyes. "What mine?" Elias stepped forward. "Interview's over." Walter left the farm uneasy. That evening he asked Edgar Pike whether there were abandoned mines near the Bellamy property. "There's one," Edgar admitted reluctantly. "Old coal shaft from before the war. Collapsed years ago. Anybody use it now? No sane person." Walter visited the abandoned mine alone the next day. The entrance sat hidden behind thick brush near the creek Clara had mentioned. Rotting support beams leaned at dangerous angles. Cold air drifted from inside carrying a smell Walter could not identify. He lit a lantern and stepped into darkness. The tunnel stretched deeper than expected. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling. Then Walter heard it. A faint sound. Not wind. Crying. Human crying. He followed it carefully until the tunnel widened into an underground chamber. His lantern revealed dozens of animal carcasses hanging from hooks. Some fresh. Some old. Then he saw the walls. Symbols covered the stone in dried blood. Walter stepped backward in horror. Near the far wall stood a wooden chair surrounded by melted candles. Leather straps hung from the armrests. The crying stopped. Suddenly Walter realized he was not alone. A shadow moved behind him. He spun around. Mary Bellamy stood at the tunnel entrance. Her dress was soaked from rain, her face pale. "You need to leave," she whispered. Walter raised the lantern. "What is this place?" Mary looked terrified. "My father says it keeps the sickness away." "What sickness? You don't understand." Walter stepped toward her. "People are dying." Tears filled her eyes. "He'll kill us all if you don't stop him." Before Walter could respond, a loud crack echoed through the tunnel. The lantern exploded against the stone wall, plunging the chamber into complete darkness. Walter staggered backward, his heart slamming against his ribs. For a brief second, silence swallowed the mine. Then something breathed nearby, heavy, wet, too close. Mary grabbed Walter's arm with trembling fingers. "Don't move," she whispered. The darkness seemed alive around them. Walter could hear dripping water somewhere deeper in the tunnels, but beneath it came another sound, slow scraping against stone. Like claws dragging across rock. Walter tried to steady his breathing. "Who's there?" he demanded. No answer came, only the scraping. "Closer now." Mary's grip tightened painfully around his wrist. "We have to go." A sudden growl echoed through the chamber. Not human, not animal, something in between. Walter felt cold terror crawl up his spine as a foul smell filled the air, rotten meat mixed with damp earth. Then came footsteps behind them. Heavy footsteps. Mary gasped softly. "Father!" A lantern suddenly flickered alive near the tunnel entrance. Elias Bellamy stood there holding the light beneath his face, shadows twisting across his hollow eyes. Samuel stood beside him carrying a rifle. "You shouldn't have come here," Elias said calmly. Walter stepped in front of Mary. "What the hell is down here?" Elias looked almost offended by the question. "You hear it breathing and still ask foolish things." Samuel aimed the rifle directly at Walter's chest. "Tie him up," he muttered. Walter lunged first. He slammed into Samuel, knocking the rifle aside as the gun discharged violently into the ceiling. Stone shattered above them. Dust exploded through the chamber. Mary screamed. Walter punched Samuel across the jaw and grabbed the rifle, but Elias swung the lantern hard into Walter's shoulder. Pain shot through his arm. The old man was stronger than he looked. Walter stumbled backward. Then the scraping sound returned. Only now it was directly behind them. Everyone froze. Even Elias. From the darkness beyond the chamber came a low clicking noise. Slow. Deliberate. Like something studying them. Samuel's face turned pale. "It's early," he whispered nervously. Elias raised the lantern higher. "Stay back." Walter saw movement deep within the tunnel. Long limbs unfolding unnaturally against the stone. Then two pale eyes appeared. Human eyes. But wrong. Too wide. Too empty. Mary began shaking violently. "Isaac," she whispered. The creature crawled forward into the lantern light. Walter nearly dropped the rifle. Its body looked stretched and broken like a man twisted apart and stitched together again. Bones protruded beneath gray skin. Its arms dragged against the ground, impossibly long, while its face still resembled Isaac Bellamy. At least part of it. The thing smiled. Its mouth opened too wide. Father, it whispered. Samuel backed away immediately. No, no, the creature tilted its head sharply. You brought another one. Walter felt frozen in place. Elias stepped forward slowly holding out one shaking hand. Isaac, listen to me. The creature twitched violently. Then its expression changed from calm to hunger. In a blur of movement it lunged. Samuel screamed as the thing slammed into him, both crashing against the cavern wall. The rifle fired again wildly into darkness. Blood sprayed across the stone. Mary cried out in horror. Walter raised the weapon instinctively and fired twice. The bullets tore into the creature's shoulder, but it barely reacted. Instead it turned toward Walter with those awful pale eyes. Then it smiled again. You smell alive, it whispered. Walter grabbed Mary's hand. Run. They bolted into the tunnels while screams erupted behind them. Samuel's screaming ended suddenly. The mine shook with violent growls and gunfire echoing through darkness. Walter and Mary stumbled through narrow passages barely lit by distant lantern glow. The tunnels twisted endlessly beneath the mountain. What is that thing? Walter shouted breathlessly. Mary's face was soaked with tears. It used to be my brother. Behind them came fast scraping sounds. The creature was following. Walter pushed Mary ahead. Move. They rounded a corner and nearly fell into a deep pit hidden in the darkness. Walter caught Mary just in time. At the bottom of the pit lay bones. Hundreds of bones. Human skeletons mixed with animal remains. Walter stared in horror. How long has this been happening? Mary could barely speak. Years. A voice suddenly echoed behind them. Mary. Soft. Almost loving. Walter turned slowly. Isaac stood at the far end of the tunnel. Or something pretending to be Isaac. Blood covered its chest and mouth. One arm bent backward unnaturally. Yet it moved calmly toward them. You left me down here, it whispered. Mary sobbed. You're not Isaac anymore. The creature stopped. Its face twitched violently. For one brief moment Walter saw pain inside its eyes. Then came another sound. A deeper sound. Something enormous moving somewhere below the mine. The walls trembled. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Isaac suddenly looked terrified. It's waking, he whispered. Walter frowned. What's waking? The creature backed away into darkness. You should never have come here. Then it vanished. A deafening roar exploded beneath the earth. Not from Isaac. Something much bigger. Walter grabbed Mary again and ran. The entire tunnel system began shaking violently. Cracks spread across the walls as rocks crashed around them. Far behind them, Elias Bellamy screamed prayers into the darkness. Then came a horrible sound. Not a scream. Not an animal cry. Something ancient. Something hungry. Walter and Mary finally saw faint moonlight ahead, the mine entrance. They burst outside moments before part of the tunnel collapsed behind them with a thunderous crash. Both fell into the mud gasping for breath. For several seconds neither spoke. The forest around them had gone completely silent. Then Walter noticed something horrifying. Fresh footprints surrounded the creek nearby. Long, narrow, dozens of them, and none had been there before. Walter slowly rose to his feet, every muscle trembling from exhaustion and fear. Moonlight reflected across the shallow creek while cold fog drifted between the trees. Mary noticed the footprints too. Her face lost what little color remained. No, she whispered. The tracks circled the mine entrance like animals waiting for prey. But they were not animal tracks. Each print looked disturbingly human. Walter lifted the rifle with shaking hands. How many are there? Mary stared into the woods. It learns. What does that mean? Before she could answer, a branch snapped somewhere nearby. Then another. Movement surrounded them in the darkness. Walter aimed the rifle toward the trees. Show yourself. Silence answered him. Then came whispering. Soft voices drifting through the forest. Human voices. Walter's blood turned cold when he realized one of them sounded exactly like his dead wife. Walter. He froze instantly. The voice came from behind the trees near the creek. Gentle. Familiar. Impossible. Mary grabbed his arm hard enough to hurt him. Don't listen to it. Again the voice floated through the woods. Walter. Please. His breathing became uneven. Tuberculosis had taken his wife 3 years earlier. He had buried her himself. Yet the voice sounded perfect. Exactly as he remembered. Tears nearly filled his eyes before anger replaced the shock. What are you? He shouted into the darkness. Something moved between the trees. Tall. Thin. Watching. Walter fired immediately. The gunshot echoed through the valley. The figure vanished. Then every whisper stopped at once. For a moment the forest became completely silent. And then the screaming began. Dozens of screams erupting from every direction. Men, women, children. The sounds rushed through the trees toward them. Mary covered her ears in terror. Run! Walter and Mary sprinted across the creek into the forest while the screaming followed behind them like a storm. Branches clawed at Walter's face as they pushed through the darkness. Several times he thought he saw pale figures moving between the trees beside them. Keeping pace. Watching. The Bellamy farmhouse finally appeared ahead through the fog. Mary stopped suddenly. We can't go there. Walter grabbed her shoulder. Then where? But before she answered, the farmhouse door creaked open by itself. Warm lantern light spilled onto the porch. Someone stood inside the doorway. Clara, the little girl Walter had met earlier, now stared at them with wide, terrified eyes. Hurry, she cried. Walter and Mary rushed toward the house while the screams behind them grew louder. The moment they entered, Clara slammed the door shut and shoved a heavy table against it. The entire house shook from violent pounding outside. Walter aimed the rifle toward the windows. What the hell is out there? Clara looked close to collapse. They come when it feeds. Walter stared at her. Mary knelt beside her younger sister. Clara, where's Mama? The child began crying immediately. She went into the woods with Father. A sudden crash came from upstairs. Everyone froze. Another crash followed. Heavy footsteps moved slowly across the ceiling above them. Walter raised the rifle again. Who's up there? No answer. Only dragging footsteps. Mary's face turned pale with horror. That's impossible. The footsteps stopped directly overhead. Then something began crawling across the ceiling. Walter could hear nails scraping wood. Slowly, patiently, Clara whimpered. It found us. A loud thud shook the ceiling. Dust rained down around them. Then came Isaac's voice. Soft and distorted. Mary. Walter stepped backward. The voice moved across the ceiling toward the staircase. Clara. The child buried her face against Mary's shoulder. The staircase creaked. Something was descending. Walter pointed the rifle toward the darkness. The thing emerged slowly into view. At first it resembled Isaac. Then Walter noticed the changes. Its jaw hung too low. Its arms nearly touched the floor. Parts of its skin appeared loose, as if another body writhed beneath it. Worst of all were its eyes. There was intelligence inside them. Not madness. Not animal hunger. Something ancient looking through human flesh. Isaac smiled painfully. You should have stayed in the mine, he whispered. Walter tightened his grip on the rifle. Stay back. Isaac ignored the warning. He stepped closer. Bones cracked loudly inside his body with every movement. I tried fighting it, he said softly. But once you hear the mountain breathing, it gets inside you. Mary was crying openly now. Please, Isaac. For one brief moment his expression softened. Then his entire body jerked violently. A deep growl escaped his throat. Not human. The lantern flames suddenly flickered. The walls began trembling again. And from somewhere deep beneath the farmhouse came a massive pounding sound. Boom, boom, boom. Walter looked down in horror. The noise was coming from underground. Isaac slowly turned his head toward the floor. Fear appeared across his twisted face. It's coming up, he whispered. The pounding grew louder. Floorboards cracked beneath their feet. Clara screamed. Walter grabbed both sisters and dragged them toward the front door just as the floor exploded upward. A massive pale limb burst through the wood. Then another. The creature beneath the mountain was forcing its way into the house. Walter only glimpsed pieces of it through dust and darkness. Huge white limbs. Clusters of eyes opening and closing beneath translucent flesh. Human faces trapped inside its body screaming silently. The smell nearly made him vomit. Isaac dropped to his knees before it. Like a servant before a king. It knows you now, he whispered to Walter. The monster's countless eyes turned toward him. And suddenly Walter understood the terrible truth. The Bellamys had never been sacrificing people to the creature. They had been feeding it just enough to stop it from reaching the surface completely. Now it was starving, and Mercer Hollow was no longer enough. The creature dragged itself higher through the shattered floorboards, splintering the farmhouse apart around it. The walls groaned as if the entire structure were being pulled downward into the earth. Walter shoved Mary and Clara toward the front door. Go. The girls stumbled outside into the freezing night just as another massive limb erupted through the floor behind them. Isaac remained kneeling before the thing. His face looked peaceful now. Almost worshipful. It remembers the old dark, he whispered. Walter backed away slowly, rifle trembling in his hands. What are you? Hundreds of eyes blinked across the creature's pale flesh. Some human, some not. Then dozens of mouths opened at once across its body. And all of them spoke together. Hungry. The voice shook the room itself. Walter fired repeatedly. Bullets disappeared into the creature's flesh with wet thuds, but it barely reacted. The wounds simply twitched and closed slowly like living mouths. The thing began pulling itself fully into the farmhouse. Walter ran. He burst through the front door seconds before the entire floor collapsed inward behind him. Mary grabbed his arm. This way. The three fled toward the tree line while the farmhouse cracked apart behind them. Through the chaos, Walter saw the creature expanding unnaturally inside the structure, its body forcing through walls and windows like liquid flesh. Then came screaming from somewhere across Mercer Hollow. Lanterns flickered alive in distant cabins. People were waking up. Walter stopped abruptly. We have to warn them. Mary stared at him like he was insane. It's too late. Another terrible roar rolled across the valley. Trees shook violently. Lights began appearing throughout the hollow as frightened residents stumbled outside carrying rifles and lanterns. Then the creature emerged from the farmhouse. Fully. Walter felt his mind nearly break at the sight. It towered above the trees, supported by massive bone-like limbs. Human bodies seemed fused into its flesh, half absorbed and writhing weakly beneath translucent skin. Faces opened and vanished across its surface like drowning people trapped beneath ice. Some were still alive. One face looked directly at Walter and mouthed the word help before sinking back into the creature's body. Clara screamed hysterically. The monster moved forward. Every step shook the ground. And as it moved, more voices came from inside it. Children crying. Women praying. Men screaming. Generations of victims trapped within the thing. Gunshots erupted from nearby cabins. Villagers fired wildly in panic. The bullets did nothing. The creature lunged with horrifying speed. One cabin exploded apart beneath its limbs. Screams filled the night as entire families vanished beneath pale flesh and collapsing timber. Walter grabbed Clara and forced himself to run again. The woods ahead seemed endless. Behind them, Mercer Hollow descended into chaos. Church bells rang frantically somewhere in the distance. Fires spread between cabins. People fled through the darkness while the creature hunted among them. Then Walter heard hoofbeats approaching. Deputy Gerald Boone emerged through the trees riding hard with 3 armed men behind him. Boone's face turned white when he saw the thing towering above the hollow. Sweet Jesus, Walter ran toward him. You knew about this. Boone chambered a shell into his shotgun. Not this big. The creature suddenly stopped moving. Its countless eyes turned toward the newcomers. Then Isaac Bellamy emerged from the burning farmhouse ruins. He walked calmly toward the monster. Toward his god. It's hungry, he called softly. Boone aimed immediately. Walter grabbed his arm. Wait. Isaac looked at them with almost human sadness. You don't understand, he whispered. It was sleeping long before we came here. Mary stepped forward crying. Isaac, please, fight it. For a moment the twisted man hesitated. Pain crossed his face. Then the creature behind him released a low growl. Isaac's body convulsed violently. Bones snapped beneath his skin. When he looked up again, whatever humanity remained inside him was fading. It showed me what lives under these mountains, he whispered. Boone pulled the trigger. The shotgun blast tore through Isaac's chest. He collapsed instantly into the mud. For one brief second the valley became silent. Then the creature screamed. Not in pain. In rage. The sound shattered windows throughout Mercer Hollow. The monster surged forward with terrifying speed. Boone shouted for everyone to scatter. Too late. One massive limb swept across the clearing, crushing 2 men instantly. Another wrapped around Boone's horse, dragging both animal and rider screaming into the creature's flesh. Walter watched in horror as Boone's body became partially absorbed into the pale mass while he was still alive. The deputy's face remained visible for several seconds. Screaming. Then it slowly disappeared beneath shifting skin. Walter nearly vomited. Mary grabbed him desperately. There's dynamite in the church cellar. Walter stared at her. What? Father stored blasting powder there years ago in case the mine opened again. Another roar thundered behind them. The creature was coming. Fast. Walter nodded sharply. Move. They sprinted through burning streets while Mercer Hollow died around them. Bodies littered the mud. Some torn apart. Some half missing. Others dragged toward the creature leaving long bloody trails behind. The church stood near the far edge of town atop a small hill. Its bell still rang wildly though nobody pulled the rope. Walter, Mary, and Clara burst inside. Candles flickered before the altar. The building smelled of smoke and old wood. Mary dropped to her knees near the cellar doors and pulled them open. Walter followed her down into darkness. Crates of dynamite lined the walls. Enough to destroy half the hollow. We can collapse the tunnels, Mary said breathlessly. Walter looked toward the ceiling as another distant scream echoed outside. It may already be too late. Above them came a thunderous crash. The church shook violently. Dust rained from the beams overhead. Clara screamed from upstairs. Walter rushed back toward the sanctuary. The front doors exploded inward. The creature's pale limbs forced their way inside the church while stained glass shattered across the floor. Clara stood frozen near the altar. And behind her, Isaac Bellamy slowly rose again. The shotgun wound remained open in his chest. But there was almost no blood. His broken body twitched unnaturally as he smiled at Walter. It doesn't let go, he whispered. Then the creature began squeezing itself into the church behind him. The entire building groaned under its size. Walter realized they had only seconds left. He looked toward the cellar stairs. Toward the dynamite. Then back at Clara. Mary saw the decision forming in his eyes instantly. No, she whispered. Walter grabbed the detonator box from the cellar wall. If this thing reaches another town, you'll kill us all. Another limb burst through the church wall. Faces writhed inside the creature's flesh, screaming silently. Walter looked at Clara. The little girl was crying too hard to speak. Then Isaac suddenly turned toward the monster behind him. Something changed in his expression. For the first time since the mine, he looked human again. Terrified. It lied to me, he whispered. The creature's eyes focused on him instantly. Isaac looked at Walter. Do it. Walter's hand tightened around the detonator. The church shook violently as the creature forced more of its enormous body through the collapsing walls. Wooden beams snapped overhead. Dust and ash filled the air. Isaac staggered toward the monster, his ruined body twitching with every step. It promised the hunger would stop, he whispered weakly. The creature answered with hundreds of overlapping voices. You opened the way. Isaac's face twisted in horror. For years he had worshipped the thing beneath the mountain, believing it had chosen him. Now Walter finally understood the truth. Isaac had never been a servant. He had only been food kept alive a little longer than the others. The creature's pale flesh surged toward him. Isaac screamed. Walter grabbed Mary and Clara. Down. He slammed the detonator trigger. For one terrifying second nothing happened. Then the earth exploded beneath Mercer Hollow. The dynamite stored beneath the church ignited all at once. A deafening blast ripped through the valley. The church floor erupted upward in fire and shattered stone. Walter barely managed to shield Clara before the ceiling collapsed around them. The creature released a sound unlike anything human ears were meant to hear. Not pain. Not anger. Something deeper. Ancient. The ground split open beneath the church as explosions traveled through the old tunnel systems under the hollow. Entire sections of earth collapsed inward. Walter saw Isaac one final time through smoke and flames. The young man looked strangely peaceful. Then both he and the creature vanished beneath falling stone. The explosion threw Walter, Mary, and Clara violently through the side of the church as the building collapsed completely into the earth. For several moments the entire valley trembled. Cabins disappeared into sinkholes. Trees folded inward. Fire spread across the mountainside while smoke swallowed the night sky. Then suddenly, silence. Complete silence. Walter lay in the mud barely conscious. His ears rang violently. Blood ran down the side of his face. Beside him Mary slowly pushed herself upright, coughing through smoke. Clara was alive too. But Mercer Hollow was gone. Where the church once stood now yawned an enormous crater filled with burning debris and collapsing earth. No sign of the creature remained. No sign of Isaac. Only darkness far below. Walter stared into that abyss, feeling cold dread settle inside him. Because from somewhere deep beneath the rubble, he still heard movement. Slow scraping. Mary heard it too. Her face became hollow with despair. It survived, she whispered. Walter wanted to deny it. But he could hear the truth beneath the mountain. Something was still alive down there. Watching. Waiting. By sunrise only 6 survivors remained in Mercer Hollow. The valley had become a graveyard of smoke and ash. Federal agents and state authorities arrived days later after nearby towns reported the explosions. Walter gave his statement carefully. Gas leak. Old mining tunnels. Mass hysteria. Nobody believed the full truth anyway. Those who survived refused to speak openly about what they saw that night. Most eventually left Appalachia forever. Mary Bellamy disappeared before winter. Some believed she changed her name and moved north. Others claimed she returned to the mountains searching for Isaac. Clara was sent to a church orphanage in Knoxville where she reportedly suffered terrible nightmares for the rest of her life. As for Walter Finch, he never truly escaped Mercer Hollow. Years passed, but the sounds remained with him. Scratching beneath floors, whispers outside windows, voices calling his name late at night. He began drinking heavily. He slept with lamps burning in every room. And every winter, without fail, he dreamed of the crater beneath the church. In the dreams he stood at the edge looking down into endless darkness. And somewhere, far below, countless pale eyes slowly opened. In 1921 Walter returned to Mercer Hollow alone. No one knows why. Perhaps guilt brought him back. Perhaps curiosity. Or perhaps the thing beneath the mountain had been calling him all along. Search parties later found his horse wandering near the abandoned valley. Walter himself was never found. But investigators discovered his journal near the collapsed church ruins. Most pages were damaged by rain. Only the final entry remained readable. It said, "I can hear them beneath me tonight. The scratching is closer now. God forgive us. We never buried it deep enough." After that, Mercer Hollow vanished from maps almost entirely. The forest reclaimed the ruins. Roads disappeared beneath weeds and mud. Yet stories continued spreading across Appalachia for decades. Hunters vanished near old cave systems. Children reported hearing voices underground. Campers woke to strange footprints circling their tents. Long, thin, almost human. In 1937, 2 railroad workers disappeared while surveying tunnels 30 miles from Mercer Hollow. Rescuers later found symbols carved into the tunnel walls using dried blood. The same symbols discovered near Noah Hatcher's body years earlier. During the 1950s, several miners in West Virginia reported hearing screams echoing from sealed shafts deep underground. One man quit his job after claiming he saw human faces moving beneath the stone itself. People called him insane. He drank himself to death months later. Then came the incident in 1974. A group of teenagers exploring abandoned land near Mercer Hollow vanished overnight. Only one survived. A 16-year-old boy named Caleb Turner stumbled onto a highway 3 days later barefoot and covered in blood. Authorities believed he suffered severe psychological trauma. Because when questioned, Caleb repeated only one sentence over and over again. "It wears people." Doctors sedated him after he clawed his own eyes trying to keep it out. The case remained unsolved. Years later, investigators searching through old Appalachian folklore noticed disturbing similarities between stories scattered across several mountain regions. Ancient tunnels, voices underground, creatures wearing human shapes, entire families disappearing near cave systems. Some legends dated back centuries before European settlers ever reached the mountains. Cherokee stories spoke of pale crawling spirits beneath the earth that stole the forms of the dead. Most historians dismissed the tales as superstition. But not everyone. In 2003, a retired professor named Ellen Marrow began researching disappearances connected to abandoned mines throughout Appalachia. Her investigation led repeatedly back to Mercer Hollow and the Bellamy family. According to her unpublished notes, dozens of missing person cases shared identical details hidden from the public. Victims hearing familiar voices before vanishing. Strange claw marks near cave entrances. Witnesses describing human figures moving unnaturally in darkness. Ellen disappeared before completing her research. Police later searched her cabin. They found maps covering entire walls. Every tunnel system across Appalachia had been marked in red ink. At the center of the largest map she had written, "It is not trapped." No trace of Ellen Marrow was ever found. Even now, locals near the old Mercer Hollow region avoid the forests after dark. Animals refuse to enter certain parts of the valley. Compasses malfunction near collapsed tunnels. And sometimes, during cold winter nights, people traveling lonely mountain roads report seeing lights moving deep among the trees. Lantern lights. As if someone is still searching the woods. Or guarding something buried beneath them. The Bellamy family became a legend over time. A warning whispered between generations. Some claim they were murderers. Others believe they were victims chosen by something ancient living beneath Appalachia long before mankind arrived. But among the oldest mountain families, one belief remained unchanged. The Bellamys were never evil. They were guardians. And when the family died, the mountain opened. For decades the story survived only as whispers traded between hunters, miners, and old women sitting on broken porches beneath the Appalachian fog. Most people laughed at it. Until the winter of 2011. 100 years after Noah Hatcher's murder. A documentary filmmaker named Ryan Mercer arrived in eastern Kentucky searching for forgotten American horror legends. He was 31 years old, ambitious, arrogant, and convinced every ghost story had a logical explanation hiding beneath bad history and superstition. His online series had become popular after exposing several famous paranormal hoaxes. Ryan mocked psychics openly and called small-town legends fear dressed as folklore. Mercer Hollow was supposed to become his next episode. The irony of his last name unsettled locals immediately. When Ryan reached the nearest surviving town outside the abandoned valley, people refused to guide him there. An old waitress at a roadside diner nearly dropped her coffee pot after hearing where he planned to go. "You don't go near that hollow in winter," she warned quietly. Ryan smiled while adjusting the camera around his neck. "Why? Monster season." The woman didn't smile back. "Because the ground starts talking when it gets cold." Ryan spent the next 2 days gathering stories with his cameraman, Luis Ortega, and sound engineer Hannah Price. Most interviews ended the same way. Fear. Old people crossing themselves. Doors closing. One retired miner finally agreed to speak on camera after several drinks. "The Bellamy's weren't sacrificing folks," the old man muttered. "They were paying a debt." Ryan leaned forward eagerly. "To what?" The miner stared toward the snowy mountains visible through the diner window. "To whatever lives under them hills." That night Hannah confessed she felt uncomfortable continuing the project. "There's something wrong with this place," she whispered inside their motel room. Ryan laughed softly. "That's exactly what makes good television." But Luis looked uneasy too. He had reviewed audio recorded near Mercer Hollow earlier that evening. Voices appeared beneath the interviews. Whispering voices. At first they sounded distorted. Then Hannah realized something horrifying. The whispers were repeating their names. The next morning the three drove toward Mercer Hollow despite worsening snow. The old roads barely existed anymore. Trees pressed tightly around the narrow trail while fog drifted through the woods. Ryan filmed continuously from the passenger seat. "People claim this valley disappeared after a mining disaster in 1911, he narrated into the camera. "Others believe something far stranger happened here." As they approached the hollow, the forest became unnaturally quiet. No birds. No wind. Nothing. Then the engine died. Luis frowned. "You serious?" He tried restarting the truck. Nothing happened. Hannah looked nervous. "Let's just walk back." Ryan opened his door immediately. "We're close." The abandoned valley waited ahead beneath falling snow. Even ruined, Mercer Hollow felt wrong. Blackened foundations jutted from the earth like broken teeth. Dead trees surrounded the remains of old cabins. The massive crater where the church once stood had partially collapsed inward over the decades, forming a jagged sinkhole descending into darkness. Ryan's excitement grew instantly. "This is incredible," he whispered. Luis adjusted the camera nervously. "Why is it so warm here?" He was right. Despite heavy snow surrounding the valley, the air inside Mercer Hollow felt strangely mild. As if heat rose from somewhere underground. Hannah suddenly stopped walking. "Do you hear that?" The others listened carefully. At first Ryan heard nothing. Then came faint scratching sounds beneath their feet. Slow. Rhythmic. Like fingernails dragging under wooden floors. Luis forced a laugh. "Probably animals." But Hannah's face had turned pale. "No," she whispered. "That sounds human." Ryan approached the old crater carefully. The hole descended deep into darkness beneath layers of collapsed stone and dead timber. His flashlight beam disappeared into blackness. Then something moved far below. Ryan immediately raised the camera. "Did you see that?" Luis stepped closer reluctantly. Before anyone could answer, a voice floated upward from the crater. "Ryan." Hannah stumbled backward instantly. Ryan froze. The voice belonged to his younger brother. The same brother who drowned 12 years earlier. "Ryan." The voice called again softly. Luis looked horrified. "How does it know your name?" Ryan's breathing became uneven. "Impossible." It sounded exactly like Daniel. Every detail perfect. "Help me." The voice came from deep beneath the earth. Hannah grabbed Ryan's coat desperately. "Do not answer it." But Ryan stepped closer to the edge. "Daniel." Something scraped against stone below. Fast. Climbing upward. Luis aimed the flashlight downward with shaking hands. For one terrible second they saw pale fingers gripping the rocks far beneath them. Too many fingers. Then the light flickered out. Complete darkness swallowed the crater. Hannah screamed. Something moved below them. Fast. Ryan finally stepped back. The ground suddenly trembled beneath their feet. Then came another voice from the darkness. This time female. Soft. Broken. "Hannah." Tears instantly filled Hannah's eyes. "My mother," she whispered. The voice cried weakly from underground. "Please." Luis backed away in terror. "We need to leave right now." But Ryan stared into the crater like a man hypnotized. Then dozens of whispers erupted at once beneath the earth. Different voices. Different people. All begging. All crying. The sound became unbearable. Luis grabbed Ryan violently. Move. The three ran back toward the forest just as the crater behind them released a deep rumbling growl. Snow shook from the trees around them. And somewhere beneath Mercer Hollow, something enormous began waking again.